Great. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great, great. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate Keiko inviting me to be a part of this panel discussion. It's good to see everyone. I hope you and your families and your communities are all doing well. We're certainly living in extraordinary times. But I wanted to come and update you on the Kentucky Wired project and let you know where we are and provide you a little brief background and history that many of you may already know, and then certainly address any questions the best I can immediately. And if I don't have good answers right now, we'll get your name and your contact information and get back with you to address your questions more thoroughly. So with that, again, my name is Jamie Link. I'm the executive director of KCNA, or the Kentucky Communications Network Authority, and most people know us as Kentucky Wired. And back in 2015, Congressman Hal Rogers and Governor Steve Beshear got together and had a vision of creating a broadband network all across the Commonwealth of Kentucky to provide internet connectivity to all of our citizens and all of our businesses. And just as to let you know where Kentucky is and was, back in 2017, there was a study that showed that Kentucky ranked 47th in the country in broadband access. And obviously, I don't think that's changed a whole lot in the past 3 years. We still rank around 44th or 45th, I believe. No one, I don't think, could have foreseen the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has certainly raised the demand for broadband connectivity for so many reasons. But the Kentucky Wired Network is what we call the interstate highway of fiber optics, or the middle mile network. We also call it the backbone. It is, the analogy we use again is the interstate highway that we have 6 rings across the state that form this network. So just like the interstate highways and the parkways across Kentucky, we have a fiber optic system running across the state, and we have off-ramps into all 120 counties across the state. So that analogy of the interstate highway and the off-ramps, I hope, gives you a good idea of what the backbone really is conceptually. I'm sure all of you have heard over the past few years, the project has had significant challenges. It's an enormous project, and with any large project, there are bound to be issues, but this project, I think, had morphed a little bit from the original vision to where it is now. But I'm glad to report that at this point, we are nearing completion of the construction of the main backbone fiber, and that should be completed by the end of the year, early next year. And then we will be working with all of your communities and all of your providers to work on getting what we call the last mile out to residences, to businesses, to higher education, to all of those places that have this demand for broadband. And obviously, as I mentioned before, because of the pandemic, it has slowed us down a little bit, but not much. We're currently at about 95% completion. And that's completing 3,300 plus miles of 288 fibers of cable. So the Commonwealth, for state government use, will use about 144 fibers of the 288, and the other 144 fibers will be used for the public consumption or public access to the backbone. I don't think there'd be much disagreement that high-speed broadband access now is critical infrastructure. Much like your water lines, your sewer lines, your electric and gas utilities, broadband access is now, I believe, critical infrastructure for today's world. And we're seeing that in so many different areas. And certainly the pandemic has highlighted the need for broadband, particularly here in the last several weeks as Kentucky and school systems across the country have looked about getting back into session, whether that be in class or remote learning. But I think it also points out a critical need for other areas of our economy and our business, including not only education but healthcare, with telemedicine and connections to health departments. Certainly, I know it's very important to all of you, economic development and economic retention of businesses. As we move into more of an online business climate, even more than we have, I think broadband access is even more critical now for businesses. And I would contend certainly that any business looking to locate in an area, they're going to look at not only workforce needs, but also infrastructure needs, including broadband access. And then also public safety and other community needs. We have connected a state police post in Dry Ridge, and one of the officers there talked about after we connected them, their broadband speed was at least 5 times faster than it had been. And you know, that could be a matter in case of 911 service, that could be several seconds faster than they were experiencing. And the way it was put to me is that with 911 service, seconds count. From the time notification comes in to the time first responders are dispatched to the time they reach a location. So there are so many needs that broadband can help address, and that was the purpose of this project 5 years ago, and it's even more so now. As I did mention, we expect to complete our middle mile network by the end of the year, early next year. And we have connected, as of today, 42 state agencies have been transitioned or migrated over to the Kentucky Wired network. And they're all experiencing at least 5 times faster speeds than they had before. And in talking with staff at those offices, they are very pleased with the performance of the network and the abilities that it gives them to service their customers, whether in the office or online. So this is the first of many. We'll probably transition close to 1,000 state agencies over the next few months, but we have to start somewhere. So we're trying to migrate state agencies at a pace of at least 4 per day, and that we're hoping to get that up to 8 to 10 per day in the coming weeks, so that we can expedite that transition. And then outside of the state government network that I mentioned earlier, the 144 fibers, there's 144 additional fibers that were constructed while we were stringing the cable that is available. We call it open access, that is available for local providers to access in order to further their service to their service areas. We believe that by the Commonwealth building this network, it makes it more economically feasible for current and perhaps even new internet service providers or ISPs to extend their services, and certainly a large focus is on rural and underserved areas of our state. And certainly rural has a large demand for many purposes. I know with Agritech, we're working with the Farm Bureau and others to extend this, and also working with the UK Extension Service to get service out across the state as quickly as possible. And Tyler and I were talking earlier about, obviously it's not going to be like a light switch being flipped on, that on a certain date we're going to flip a switch and everybody's going to have broadband service. Obviously there's a lot of infrastructure that continues to need to be built, and that's that last mile and even the last quarter mile of service that we'll be working on. But through open fiber, local providers will now have access to this broadband backbone that then connects to the World Wide Web. Additionally, a lot of cell providers, whether it be AT&T or Verizon or Sprint or T-Mobile, whomever, or local service provider, cellular providers, they can also tap into the network to expand their services across the state, building more cell towers and providing more services to customers, more wireless service to customers. And along that same line, oh,
Mind if I interject
no,
real
no,
quick?
please.
I have a question for Magistrate Sims about who will control or allocate the companies that take up the extra width. And Magistrate Sims, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself as well.
Just my question is, there some of these additional carriers, like I know Kentucky Utilities and Kinergy has been trying to, I think, work with AT&T to deliver some of this rural broadband, but that's kind of been a stumbling block, I think, through some of that process and kind of held it up. So I was just trying to understand what the governance is going to be and how the allocations will happen, and how that'll kind of be controlled to ensure consistent delivery.
Sure, sure. Thanks, Magistrate Sims. Right now, I would say that KCNA or Kentucky Wired, along with Open Fiber and along with those local service providers, we will work in collaboration to determine what the capacity needs are going to be for that area, or perhaps for a particular customer. You may have a large industrial customer, something that needs a lot of bandwidth. So there'll be different needs from residential to large industrial, but we will work together to allocate the appropriate bandwidth. And people smarter than me would tell you, I believe, and Tyler, you probably know, one strand of fiber carries an extraordinary amount of data. And we have 288 fibers that we're building, 144 for this purpose. So I believe, and it is my understanding, that we will have plenty of capacity for what the Commonwealth will need for the next several decades. If I'm hoping I'm answering your question in that we will work together both at the state and local levels to make sure that we allocate the appropriate bandwidth to meet a customer's needs or a service provider's needs.
So the second part to that question, and this will finish it up. Thank you for that first one. Is what is, in your opinion or in your team's opinion, what is the realistic timetable for broadband access for every resident of the state of Kentucky? Is it 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Kind of what's a realistic goal or expectation for that, and what should we pass along to our constituents about? Hey, it's being worked on, but here's the reality.
Well, I think that's a really good question, and that's probably the most important question that probably goes across the state, from residential users to business users. I don't know, respectfully, that I don't know that I'd want to predict how long it would be, because there's a lot of variables. Obviously, in areas where there's already a service provider, and depending upon their infrastructure currently in place, that timetable could move a lot faster, of course. For areas that don't have the infrastructure in place, and fiber construction will need to be constructed, or you'll notice in my last bullet point on this page, we are constantly looking at other technologies, whether it be wireless or satellite or anything else that may be coming on the horizon, of how we can get this service out to that residential customer, that small business, or those large industrial customers. As I mentioned, the backbone, we anticipate completing that by late this year or early next year. And on a parallel path, Open Fiber, our wholesale partner, will be, they're ramping up their staffing and their service in Kentucky to start working with local providers, to start laying the groundwork for just doing that, is getting service out to customers. Obviously, there's an economic element to that of what that infrastructure build will cost. or what other technologies might be available to mitigate some of that hardwire infrastructure construction. But starting early next year, I would anticipate that Open Fiber, along with KCNA and your local providers, will start aggressively pushing service out as quickly as they can. So I think, again, the variables are going to be the economics, the current infrastructure versus the infrastructure need, and the types of service that will be needed. And we get into Kentucky's topography. Out west, it's flat. Lived out west for about 3 years at Ken Lake State Park, and then I've also worked at Pine Mountain State Park in Bell County in the mountains. So we have a lot of topographical diversity across the state that will affect the ability to roll out this infrastructure, either by hardwire or through some wireless technology or some other technology that is still being developed. So I know as soon as possible is not a good answer to your question, Magistrate Sims, but we will move as quickly as we can. And hopefully within the next 2 to 5 years, I'll say we hope to have put a major dent in the demand for this service.
Thank you.
My pleasure. I knew I'd do that. The next slide I'm showing on the screen is just a pictorial of what the network kind of looks like. When I talk about rings, that doesn't look a lot like rings, but there is a methodology to that. And you'll see in the blue circles there are different ring numbers. Like rings 1A is the kind of the golden triangle of the Commonwealth. Ring 1B is the eastern Kentucky portion of the network. Ring 2 is the southern border over to Bowling Green area. Ring 3 is that E-Town to Lexington to Bowling Green. Ring 4 is the far west part of our state. And Ring 5, of course, is up along the Ohio River. You'll notice that everything in green is the fiber is complete. The fiber is all installed and is passing light, as they say. In western Kentucky, you'll see some yellow and you'll see some gray. The yellow is segments that are currently under construction and will be completed very soon. The 2 gray areas are what we call the gap. And we're working aggressively with contractors to get that gap completed. And we anticipate having that completed by early to mid 2021. But we're also looking at ways, and the reason we have this system built in rings, and the 6 rings form the entire network. If there should be for instance, an automobile accident or an ice storm, or we have little critters called squirrels that sometimes like to chew on cable, and they can break some of those glass fibers as they're having lunch. That can cut a connection. But the beauty of the system is that if that service is cut at a particular location, the light will travel backwards around the rest of the ring, and there will be no break-in service or very little break-in service. You won't be out for hours or days. You'll be out for a matter of minutes. So the redundancy is one of the primary features of this network. And in Ring 4, as we complete that, I know a lot of you are probably in West Kentucky. Our hope is we can turn up service and work with local partners to provide any redundancy that may not be currently available until we complete our backbone. But again, that should be a matter of about 8 to 10 months as we complete that, and then we'll have a complete, fully functional network available for use. The last slide, I just wanted to put up my contact information. You've got my name. My email is very simple. It's jamie.link@ky.gov. And there's my phone number. That's my mobile phone that I have with me at all times. And I want to provide that to you. I'm happy to help address any questions you might have. And certainly, the last mile connectivity is open fibers territory. And as they're getting up and running, you can contact me, and I will put you in touch with Open Fiber's executive director, or their CEO, I should say, so that we can start addressing your questions directly as to what the next steps are in getting broadband connectivity out to your communities. And then once, perhaps in a future training session here with Keiko, I've spoken with the CEO of Open Fiber. His name is David Flessas, Flessas. David has offered to participate in one of these training sessions if so needed, to come out and better explain Open Fiber's efforts and their next steps in getting service out to your communities as well. So we want to be a good partner with all of your communities, with all the local governments, to get this service out to your counties and your cities. And again, as I mentioned early on, we're going to be working with not only all of you as local officials, but we'll work with the Extension Service, with the health departments, with local libraries, and anyone we can to get this service out to your citizens as quickly as possible. And some of those interim solutions or immediate solutions, and I know a lot of you have probably already talked about it, would be hotspots. The creation of hotspots in your communities, whether it be in a mobile hotspot in a school bus or some other vehicle, or at a local community center, whether it be a library or an extension office or a government building, to at least get some kind of wireless technology or broadband technology into your communities that don't currently have it, that need it for the school kids to start their remote learning or keep up with their lesson plans, or for other needs that you might have, until we can get the infrastructure run out to the individual customer. So with that, that concludes my initial remarks. I'm happy to take any questions at this time, or I can turn it over to Tyler, and I will hang around and address any questions that might come up before the presentation ends.
Thank you so much, Amy. We do have a number of questions in the chat. So,
okay.
The first one is from PBA Boggs in Leslie County. He says, based on our courthouse in Leslie County, based on the map, will have Kentucky Wired running through it. Will our office, the PBA office, and other state offices in the courthouse be automatically converted over to it?
That's a great question, and my understanding of the history. I started in this role in January, so a lot of things happened over the past 4 years prior to my my tenure here. But my understanding with the PVAs and perhaps some other, for lack of a better term, quasi-governmental entities, it was optional. And I think several of the PVA offices across the state are participating and want to be connected to the Kentucky Wired system and will be connected. Others decided to opt out and stay with their local providers, whether that be a municipal provider or AT&T or Windstream or Charter Spectrum or whomever. So we are always willing to work with end users, whether it be the PVA's office, the clerk's offices, the health departments, whomever, that want to jump on and connect to the Kentucky Wired system. We'll certainly do that. And feel free to reach out to me, and we can see if Leslie County is on that list, or I'm not sure if you've been involved with those discussions previously, but we want to get all the customers on that we can.
I have not been involved, but I will reach out to you. We'd be very interested.
Great. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Hey, we have another couple questions. Something I find fascinating, Elon Musk's Starlink project. It appears to have a high success rate. How would the Kentucky Wired network interact with such a system once it goes live? So that's the satellite system from...
Right. And Tyler and I were talking about that before the session began. I'm certainly not a network engineer. I'm an accountant by trade, or by education. But My understanding is, and when talked about the cellular providers as well, there's the spectrum or there's wireless technology where the data flows through the air essentially. But at some point, that signal carrying that data will need to get off the spectrum because it's limited, and it needs to get onto fiber. So depending upon the infrastructure setup and the structure of that, those wireless technologies, I'll call them, they eventually have to get out of the air and get onto a physical fiber in order to accommodate the demand for that. Tyler, you may be able to address that better than I, but our goal would be that satellite providers such as Starlink, there's another company called Viasat that we've been in touch with, and then wireless companies. We'll work with all of them to provide this backbone onto which their wireless signals can ride to get out to the web. So that's certainly in the mix, and that's going to form the comprehensive broadband connectivity across Kentucky.
Great. We have a question. How many people or businesses are actually hooked up to the system and using it right now?
Right now, as I mentioned earlier, we have 42 state offices, state government offices. I guess in technology, you've heard of beta tests. State agencies are the first ones that we're connecting to make sure everything is working properly. So we are continuing to connect state agencies. And then I just spoke with Mr. Flessis earlier today, and we talked about a parallel path whereby Open Fiber will start to progressively roll out their services as quickly as possible, so that as each ring is completed and fully functional, Open Fiber then has the ability to start connecting its customers to the backbone as well. So right now we've connected 42 state agencies as of today, or by the end of the day we'll have 42. And then we're going to connect 2 more tomorrow. Then we hope to ramp it up to 4 more state agencies, and then 8 state agencies per day. So we've started that, and if you'll remember the map that I showed you, Ring 1A is the most complete ring, and that's the Golden Triangle from Lexington to Louisville to Northern Kentucky. We've got 165 state agencies in that ring that we're focusing on first. So if we can go 4 or 8 per day, we hope to wrap that up by the end of September or early October. But again, on a parallel path, it's Open Fiber's intention to start working with local customers and local providers to start making connection for their needs.
Thank you. Next question is from the Deputy Judge in Madison County, Colleen Cheney. She wants to know, and she can unmute herself if she wants to clarify this, is this solely a private deployment plan, and what should counties be doing to expedite rural development?
Well, so obviously KCNA is a state agency, a public agency. Open Fiber is a private company that was contracted in the original development of the project, and they have the access to the backbone for the other 144 fibers that I mentioned earlier. And one of the benefits of that, and certainly I appreciate competition and I appreciate service areas, and in my mind, we want to work with all the providers to provide access to this backbone. But Open Fiber, the sales that they make, or the space that they lease on this network, the Commonwealth retains a significant revenue share of that. And the reason that's a good thing, because I'm sure many, if not most of you, have heard of the challenges the project has faced. Those revenues will go towards paying for the construction of the network. So that was always envisioned from day one, that the revenues, obviously state agencies will now pay KCNA for their internet service just like they would a current provider. But also any customers that connect through open fiber and through their local service providers, the Commonwealth will retain some of that revenue. As a matter of fact, it's very significant. It's 75% or greater that comes to the Commonwealth. And those monies will be used to fund the project and get away from general fund funding in order to generate our own funds to pay for the debt service and the operations of the network. Does that answer the question?
It does, thank you. But just as a follow-up for counties that are looking, most of our lines are coming down Main Street because that's where all our state agencies are.
Right.
For those of us that want to deploy out into the farther regions, what could we as counties do to expedite participation in getting it to those more rural points? Is that a coordination county by county, or is that something that you all have on a master plan based on those that have already signed up on the line? Thank you.
Sure, and thanks, Judge. And I believe, Judge, that Madison County did what we call an overbuild. I think Richmond and Madison County, as we were constructing the fiber, they also added some additional fiber for your county's use. But that is on a county basis because we have so many providers around the counties. We have some county-specific providers, and we also have some large telecommunications providers that provide services. So my recommendation would be to, number one, work with your local providers on what their plans are to push service out into the rural and underserved areas of your counties. And also, we can put you in touch with Open Fiber. And again, that's that collaboration where we're all going to have to work together to address this need because there's a significant cost to doing that, and we appreciate that. And obviously, at the federal level, there's many discussions taking place on how to fund this enormous demand for broadband service. And I'm not exactly sure where that stands. Tyler may have a better finger on that pulse. But we all have to work together in order to get this service out to the resident at the end of the road. Everybody needs this, and whether, again, it's for classwork or for a home-based business, whether it's for connectivity for, let's face it, for entertainment purposes. In our world today, there's Netflix and Amazon and gaming and all those things that people enjoy. And without broadband, they can't enjoy those. So there's a large quality of life issue in my mind as well. So, you have my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll put you in touch with Open Fiber. We'll participate in that along with local governments and your local providers to roll this service out as quickly as we can.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I got a question. This is Rob Ham out of Round County. The question I said, are we having a lot of problem with the local providers tied on to the network? We have particularly wired in our courthouse. There's Moorhead, it's between two hills, but I live 14 miles to the north and about 16 miles from Flemingsburg, close to the Fleming County line.
Right.
We have a lot of people I live 2 miles from Spectrum Cable, so I have to do satellite TV. Too far out for cell phone coverage, and I lose it about 3 miles from my house.
Right.
But also, we're with a provider like Windstream, who is bankrupt, and they have, I think I pay $65 for like 3 megabytes or something or other, which is pretty not fast enough to do. And I think we're seeing in rural areas, what I'm hearing is the providers are not wanting to tie on to it because they don't want to invest or cannot invest on that system to bring that cable out to our rural people. If it's sitting there in the middle of town and we have, people that don't live that far from town that can't get it, just the fact that they cannot, our local providers do not want to.
And that's the $64,000 question. I think it's and I think Rowan County, as an aside, also did an overbuild where they added additional fibers in Rowan County to our construction. But I think that is the issue. Two issues really. It's getting the infrastructure out to the end user, the customer, and it's the affordability aspect of it. A lot of people can't or don't want to pay $100 or $150 or $200 a month for broadband service. They just can't do it. So how do we make it affordable? How do we get the infrastructure out to those customers, whether it be through a fiber or whether that be through wireless technology of some sort? And then, as we discussed a few minutes ago, the economics of it and getting funding through whatever vehicle, whether that be the federal government, through the FCC, the USDA Rural Development, through perhaps some unknown source now. As I mentioned, the federal government is working on this issue, and it's an enormous issue. But how can we afford to get the infrastructure out to the end user? And it may be 2 miles, it may be 10 miles, it may be 20. And obviously, the further you have to bring the infrastructure, the more expensive it is. So again, we want to work with even the large telecom companies. Part of the premise of this was with the Commonwealth spending, the capitalized cost of this project is about $368 million. By the Commonwealth spending that and putting that infrastructure in place, much like governments put in water lines and sewer lines, we want to work with those local providers, whether they be a large telecom company like Spectrum or Windstream or a municipal provider. We want to work with them to get this service out to those customers who so desperately need it. And one thing that I note about Windstream, to my understanding, and I just read an article in the paper recently, their bankruptcy is not necessarily a financial bankruptcy. It's more of a corporate restructuring mechanism. So it's our hope, and it's my understanding that Windstream is still very viable. They're just having to restructure their company and perhaps some of their business model. But we fully anticipate that Windstream will be viable going into the future. And working with them and Spectrum and Duo counties and other local providers, we'll work to get that service out to the customers as efficiently and as economically effectively as we can.
Well, I guess the one other thing I had, I guess the problem, isn't there a problem also with how these providers are, with the FCC, how they actually show the coverage in their area? Because I mean, if you look at Brown County, it looks like you can stay anywhere in the whole county and get AT&T service, which if you've ever been up there, you know.
I have, and my girlfriend's from Moorhead, so yeah, I've been to Loudoun County. The FCC maps, and again, Tyler may have some other insights into this. I think the FCC maps are, and not to disparage anyone, but they're very suspect. And I think their criteria, they say that high-speed broadband is currently 25 megabits download, 3 megabits upload, megabits per second. That's really not sufficient anymore. Additionally, I think by their criteria and their methodology, if they have one customer in an area that has that service, they consider that area to be served. And there may be dozens or hundreds of other customers in there that don't have service. So I know that's being reviewed at the federal level as to the mapping process and how that is determined as to where service is needed. And we'll certainly keep an eye on that and participate in that. But also by working with the local providers and hearing the issues and our citizens, what the needs are, we can more accurately look at how to deploy this service across the state.
Thank you. We have a number of other questions in the chat. Commissioner Basacker has a question about FCC regulations. If you would like to unmute yourself and ask that, feel free.
Certainly. Well, it's good to follow up Judge Ham. Judge, I'm going to be down there at Cave Run Lake hopefully this weekend, so maybe I'll run into you down there. My question is about FCC regulations, and I've been in touch with the FCC. Senator Will Schroeder up here and myself have been kind of taking this challenge on the past couple of years. And with the FCC, their regulations, as stated, say that the customer is supposed to receive 80% of the suggested speed 80% of the time. And so out here in rural Campbell County, I only live by the good crow flies, 15, 20 miles from Cincinnati, and we're pulling, 1.5 to 2.5 megabytes per second on the download, and if we hit 1 on the upload, we have a party. I mean, we have a party and just smile and cheer, and, trying to upload a video while we got that speed. But Cincinnati Bell, I met with them and Senator Schroeder here about 2 months ago, and they were very forthcoming in their layout and their vision, their plans, their maps. And you mentioned maps a second ago, and it's very hard to pin them down because, of course, it costs and things like this.
Sure.
Lo and behold, I went from the Flintstones to the Jetsons 3 weeks ago today. We ended up getting broadband here in this community, but just over the hill, they're still in the dark ages. And, there's areas and pockets that just, I'm not in the telecommunication business, but you wonder how in the world that area does not have service when certain other areas do.
Right.
Is from your experience, is there other than the ISP dictating, well, this is what we can afford or can't afford, is there anything else that you're aware of that kind of dictates that piece other than terrain? I get it, but my terrain is the same terrain as, throw the rock over the next hill, and it's the same deal.
Right, and that's a great question, and that is the issue. Is as we talked a few minutes ago, is the as I mentioned earlier, someone said I saw them stringing the cable across my backyard. Why can't I connect? I don't know that I fully know the answer to that and what the FCC requirements are. Cincinnati Bell is a major partner with Kentucky Wired. They did a lot of the infrastructure work in your area, Commissioner, and I don't, and I think that's what we're going to see for a while, and that's why I was hesitant to commit to any kind of a time frame of when every citizen or every resident would have access, because I just don't know. And as you said, on your side of the road, you've got it. On the other side of the road, they don't. I'm sure there's a business reason for that. And you also mentioned the speed that you have. I think the demand on the capacity of the infrastructure in your area, as more and more people get on it and more people use it for different uses, and if there's a lot of graphics and other types of data that is flowing, it's going to eat up capacity more. So we've got to work on with those local providers. Again, I don't want to be redundant, but it's working with those local providers, looking at their business case, their economic case as to why do you have it on your side of the road and your neighbor doesn't, and what is their plan? Do they plan to expand to that area, and if so, when? And then the other part of the equation is, and if I get service, what's it going to cost me? And obviously, for the more capacity and the more speed, there's going to be, there's going to be a higher cost. But if you're running a home-based business or something, that may be perfectly fine for your needs, whereas a residential customer may only want to pay $40 or $45 or $50 a month for that speed and for that capacity. So we talk with Cincinnati Bell quite often. It's my understanding that they're currently being acquired by Macquarie Capital, and Macquarie was a part of this original deal for Kentucky Wired, so there is some synergy there, I think, and we've talked with several of the folks at Cincinnati Bell for the past several years about improving the service and increasing the service in northern Kentucky, and the same holds true for the other providers around the state.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the information, and like I said, working with them, that they're very tight on what they're willing to release, obviously, as far as maps and things like that, and timetables. I get that,
Right.
And we need to hopefully pull together as a group of commissioners, magistrates, judges, and really hold their feet to the fire a little bit because, you know, again, it is just like roads and water, of which we don't have water out here either. You know, there's a lot of things like that, but the people out here, you know what they say, and there's a lot of commissioners, magistrates, and judges on here that know the same thing. People would rather have internet than they would city water because I can haul water in the back of my truck. I can't haul internet.
Right, right. And I think that there's, as you mentioned, the great unknowns, and talking about the FCC maps and the SEC thresholds for what qualifies as high-speed broadband. And I think I've made the comment to several of my colleagues that it's unfortunate that we're having to experience the COVID-19 pandemic, but one thing it has certainly done is highlighted in this new world what broadband means to everyone. And, you know, broadband was increasing and it was rolling out, but COVID-19 just put it into overdrive. And now I think everyone's kind of scrambling to meet this enormous critical demand that we have as quickly as we can. And the foundation just wasn't there to have good data and to have a good financial model of how we're going to address this need. So I think there's a bit of catch-up taking place in trying to ramp up the rollout of broadband. How are you going to pay for it? And obviously, in an election year, that maybe heightens sensitivities one way or the other. I don't know. Our job is to get this backbone finished and to work with Open Fiber and your local providers to get service going. So, and that's what we're going to do, and we do that every day, multiple hours per day, to try to find solutions to these needs.
Thanks. We do have a question, and you can make this a little bit broader. Over in the green area of the map, we have Bourbon County.
Yes.
County Clerk Richard Eads says that their courthouse is ready to be turned on. Do you have an estimate of when that will happen? If it's ready, and that would go for a lot of the areas that are green. If it's ready to be turned on, when will it be turned on?
I don't know the exact date, but if it's in Bourbon County, it should be relatively soon. And if you want to shoot me an email, again, jamie.link@ky.gov, I'll get an answer for you and get back with you and let you know. And by the way, my family's all from Bourbon Counties, if you know any links over in Bourbon County.
We also have a similar question about Rowan County. So perhaps folks that have questions about when their county might go live, you can send them to Jamie.
Yes.
And ask, you know, for a little bit more of a complete timeline or a more specific timeline for you. Judge Whitfield is in Western Kentucky, though, in that area that has some unfinished work, and he wants to know what a realistic time frame is for perhaps some of those gray areas or the yellow areas on your map.
Well, as I mentioned out in Ring 4, again, excuse me, the gray lines, what we call the gaps, we hope to have that backbone segment of that completed by the April to June timeframe of 2021. And then once that's completed, we're back to working with the local providers to start rolling out that last mile or that last quarter mile to get the service to the residents or to the business. And I'm not sure about all the situations, and Tyler, I'd defer to you about the level of local providers across the state. Some areas certainly have that. Some areas may not, as far as local providers. And we're also looking at ways that we can enhance that service. I know there are multiple cooperatives around the state and utilities and plant boards, in addition to the telecom companies. And there may be some new. A lot of the articles I've read in industry periodicals and things is communities and counties and regions forming their own ISP in order to obtain funding and to get service out to their citizens. So I think we're entering a new world of broadband connectivity because of the urgency that COVID-19 has presented, and how we can get that service out to everyone that wants it. So to address the question, I think we'll finish the backbone in spring, early summer of 2021, and then working with your local providers to push that service out to the residents and the businesses of those areas. That'll take a few months.
Thank you. One last question from Kent King. How does, when local co-ops already supply 100% broadband to rural areas and provide to other counties, will this take business away from them?
No, that's not our intention at all. And I'm glad you asked that question, because and this is Jamie speaking, but and I appreciate the concerns about competition. The way I look at it is, we will now have an asset that wasn't there before, which is this backbone. And now these local providers, without having to spend the money to build that type of infrastructure, they will now have access to that in partnership with Open Fiber, of course. But the local provider will work through Open Fiber to connect to our backbone. And that can be a local city municipal provider, a county provider. It could be AT&T or Charter Spectrum, the big guys. That this is an open access backbone. We are not here to compete with anyone. We're here to provide an enhanced service to these other providers. And with due respect, based upon an economic model, are you going to spend tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to build infrastructure into a location that will no way pay for itself if you're a for-profit company and you have shareholders and boards of directors and things? And again, I'm not disparaging anyone. I'm trying to convey that this project, the mission of it is to provide this infrastructure, particularly in areas that the for-profit companies have not ventured into because of the economic realities. But now that infrastructure will be in place and will allow those providers to avoid that cost of construction and now have access to this capacity that they haven't had before. So I view it, instead of competition, I view it as collaboration and partnership to better be able to provide this service to the people of those areas.
Hey, thank you. And on that note, I think that's a pretty good transition, actually, as we bring on our next guest. Thank you so much, Jamie. He's going to stick around
Yes.
until the end, and if we have questions after our next speaker, we can tie those all up at the end. So. Take it away.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Like a lot of you, I'm getting used to everybody calling this the new normal, and I was on video conferences all day yesterday. Unfortunately for me, I have a face made for radio, so I'm still trying to get used to being able to see everybody. I was in front of my board of directors yesterday, and some of our CEOs and managers of our associate members throughout the country, and it was good to see everybody, but I sure do miss meeting in person. So I want to thank everybody here at KCO for the opportunity to be here today. I work really well with Shelley in Frankfort. There's nobody that represents you all better in Frankfort in front of the legislature than Shelley Hampton. I think she does a great job. Judge Henderson, he does a wonderful job too. In my previous life, I worked for the Kentucky League of Cities. I don't think I'll get booed on here for that, but I know Deputy Judge Colleen Cheney is on here, so I actually worked for her husband JD, who is a mentor of mine, and I think the world of JD. But I have a healthy respect for what you all do as city officials and being local government, county officials, excuse me, and being the government that's closest to your people. I certainly understand and respect what you do in terms of meeting with your constituents and hearing from them on a daily basis. So. I did want to I'm going to go a little bit off script rather than getting right into my presentation, and I wanted to give you all a web address that I think may be beneficial to you all to answer a couple of the questions that were on here earlier regarding the FCC and some of the maps. If you will go to www.fcc.gov/reports, and there's a couple of other things like -research/maps, you will get some information regarding what is called the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. This is the latest from the FCC. It will be a reverse auction that will start in October. And there are about 99,000 census blocks, I believe, in Kentucky based on the FCC's maps of areas that are eligible for RDOF funding. So that gives providers in these areas, and you can actually go in, and these may be some maps that you can look and see if some of your areas are eligible for this RDOF funding. That may give you an opportunity to look and see and follow along to see if eventually in the fall folks actually bid on providing service in some of these areas. So I did want to point out that to you. I know there was a question earlier regarding the maps at the FCC. That is something that's constantly being worked on. It's been a focus of the current FCC. You're seeing it at the federal level as well. There was the passage, Chairman Wicker's bill, the Broadband Data Act, was actually passed this past year. So you are going to see more granular maps, things at a granular level, down to a street level, that will be incorporated with future funding. However, RDOF, there is still some issues in terms of mapping with the RDOF, as Mr. Link referred to earlier. So I did want to turn your attention to that specific website, though. It may be a resource for you to use in the coming months as the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund reverse auction gets underway. There was a conversation earlier, I believe a commissioner asked about maps and having providers in those areas not being able to divulge a lot about their business plans. Right now, based on the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, providers are in what's called a quiet period. They basically cannot publicly announce or say whether they are going to bid on some of these areas. So if they do have a business plan that will go into some of these rural areas later, that's probably a part of what they're planning to do with the reverse auction. So I'll be honest with you, I represent 18 independent cooperatives, rural telephone cooperatives, and some small commercial companies. I do not know who's bidding on what and going into these areas. They cannot, according to the FCC, divulge that publicly right now because they are in this quiet period, basically, prior to the auction in the fall. So those are just a couple of things I wanted to point out to you. Those might be some resources, maybe shine some light on some of those questions that were asked earlier. So if you do have any other questions, though, I do want this to be as knowledgeable for you all as possible. And if you have questions, feel free to interject. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. And I will provide my contact information at the end. And if you do have another question and can't get to it today, please feel free to contact me. I want to be a resource for everybody that's here and those that you represent. So with that, again, I wanted to talk to you briefly about who we are, what some of the challenges we've had during COVID, and where we're going in the future. As I said, the Kentucky Telecom Association, I represent the rural broadband providers in the state, and that is to say those 18 independent cooperatives and small commercial companies. That includes 2 regional wireless providers in Kentucky, Bluegrass Cellular and Appalachian Wireless. And so we also represent about 90 to 100 other associate members. Those are folks that offer services in Kentucky to a number of our telcos. The members of the Kentucky Telecom Association actually serve all or part of 45 counties in Kentucky. So We actually serve about a third of the, or more than a third of the counties in the Commonwealth. We employ more than 1,200 people, and we have a direct economic impact of over $312 million in the Commonwealth, and a total overall economic impact of about $414 million. That's based on a Hudson Institute study that was conducted about 4 years ago. This is a map, and I will be honest with you. This map is a dated map that's on the PSC's website, but that shows you the incumbent local exchange carriers in the state. That does not include if you have a CLEC or if somebody started to come into your area to provide broadband. That's not covered on this map. But you can kind of see some of the territories where the cooperatives are in the state versus the large cap price carriers. I do not represent the cap price carriers, so anything I say, I cannot speak on behalf of the folks at AT&T, Windstream, Cincinnati Bell, and again, likewise, the cable association has their own group, and folks like Charter Spectrum are a part of that. So I do not represent any of those folks. So anything I tell you basically applies to our rural broadband providers that are the cooperatives and the small commercial telcos. Like everybody else, we've been impacted by COVID in a couple of ways. I do want to say that telecom was deemed an essential service. The governor did follow the CISA directives from the Department of Homeland Security, so telecom was deemed essential. And so we've been maintaining and operating our networks throughout this whole entire process. So you all are probably well aware, having switched to, you and your staff both have, suddenly went home and are now telecommuting, and your children maybe, obviously had to switch to distance learning back in March. And so that impacted us as well, and we're seeing obviously an increase in network usage over that time. I was talking to Shelley during Mr. Link's presentation, when they were talking about uploads, we're seeing companies that are seeing bandwidth increases of 200, 300% with some of our companies, just because, children being at home and everybody being on devices simultaneously in the home. So obviously bandwidth and the usage of the internet has certainly spiked over the last few months. Our members, a majority of them did keep what was called the Keep America Connected Pledge. The FCC chairman, Chairman Pai, in mid-March, rolled out the Keep America Connected Pledge so that those who took the pledge, they would vow to not terminate any residential or small business customers because of their inability to pay due to COVID disruptions. That also included waiving late fees and helping to install Wi-Fi hotspots in areas that were needed. A majority of our member companies did. Majority of our member companies in KTA did take the pledge. I think over 800 companies nationally did. And we also, those who did not formally take the pledge, have basically operated like they did. They're waiving late fees. They've continued to set up hotspots within their service territories. So they've tried to do things to meet the demand of their cooperative members and the members of their communities back home. And with that, they've been operating under an order from the PSC, also not to disconnect any regulated service. So that pertains to voice service in the Commonwealth. And that order is still in place in terms of halting disconnections on voice service. And like you, the safety of our employees has been very important. I know you all value the people that you have entering your building, both your constituents and those on your staff. Likewise, with our customers and our employees, safety was paramount, and we tried to prioritize that early on. We have closed lobbies and encouraged a lot of business transactions to basically switch to online service, or we've kept our drive-thrus open during this time. We've established, most of our member companies have established work-from-home opportunities for their employees to limit the interactions in the office, and those who've had to come in the office have been maintaining and practicing social distancing. One of the things early on, and I'm sure you've heard this, it could have been from either healthcare facilities in your community, it could have been from first responders, securing PPE early on. There was certainly some supply chain issues. We did not, as people were transitioning to home, if they did not have service, we prioritized those service calls for folks that suddenly had to work in the home or may have had a student. They may not have had access earlier that had a student that was transitioning to virtual learning. So we prioritized those service calls with our technicians. So securing PPE early on was something that was very important for us. We were basically calling all across areas of the state to try to locate, the appropriate amounts of PPE. And so that was a challenge for our industry as well. And we're still, ongoing with that. The broadband or the bourbon industry in Kentucky suddenly transitioned to making hand sanitizers. Who doesn't enjoy Kentucky bourbon? And so we were actually able to work with some of the distillers in the state to get adequate amounts of hand sanitizer. We worked with the State Chamber of Commerce about securing a sufficient number of cloth masks. So we really did pull together as a community in this state in order to meet some of the demands that we had to secure PPE. And this is still ongoing. We're still prioritizing service calls, trying to limit as much as possible those interactions with customers due to safety concerns, but we are still meeting the demands of our customers. We're asking our employees to do daily temperature checks. If we're having to do service calls, customers have to answer a list of questionnaires, basically take a healthcare survey before our technicians enter the home. All right. And so I want to talk about the impact that we've had and some of the examples that we've taken to work with our communities. As I said, many of our companies did accept the FCC's Keep America Connected pledge. Many of you may have been in contact, if you have a rural telephone cooperative in your area, may have been in contact with them about establishing free drive-up Wi-Fi hotspots. We've worked with judges in our communities, with superintendents, school officials, in order to try to meet those demands. And as I said, we've also seen several companies increase download and upload speeds for students and those who are working from home. Early on in the pandemic, for the first couple of months, especially to get through the school year, we had several of our companies that offer free or discounted plans for students that were transitioning to work from home and telecommuting and virtual learning. So those are a few of the things we did early on, and you're actually seeing. You may see some of these signs in your. Some point, some of these signs in your community, and we'll get to the slide there. These are just a couple that you may have seen in and around some of these areas. The one on the left side of your screen is PRTC, People's Rural Telephone Cooperative. They serve Jackson and Owsley County and are actually starting to serve parts of Lee County in the future. You all see Logan Telephone Cooperative, now known as LTC Connect. They installed several drive-through Wi-Fi hotspots in their community to help meet the demands for some of their students. And like everybody else, we're going to have challenges into the future. We have a backlog of installations. Obviously, those who did not have service, that were eligible to get service, suddenly have now wanted service because they may have had an immediate need. So there's a backlog of installations. As I said, we've done augmented work schedules, so something that may have taken 2 or 3 days in the past, you may take a week or two now to get somebody hooked up. So, obviously that backlog, we're trying to play catch up over the last few months. Non-payment of services is obviously becoming an issue. It's not necessarily affordability, but those who suddenly may be out of work or temporarily displaced from work, internet service may not suddenly be a priority. So non-payment of services is starting to become an issue as, stimulus money is winding down. We're seeing an increase in accounts in arrears. So that's a challenge that we'll be dealing with heading into the future. And just the rising cost of broadband deployment. As the demand increases, contractors are in demand. It's not just Kentucky. We have contractors that serve all over this region. So getting them here in our communities, a lot of times you may be bidding on contracting services. And I mean that the longer you wait on some of these projects, the cost continues to escalate. So increased demand with these programs at the federal level, that demand will only increase as, RDOF comes online in the fall, and these reverse auctions, these bidding requirements that folks will have. Again, we're going to have to start looking out into the future because we're going to have supply chain issues. You're already seeing a disruption in some of these supply chain issues for things like fiber drop wire. So supply chain issues for materials is certainly something that's going to take place. And as Mr. Link said earlier, I wanted to echo something that he said. You really can't just flip a switch. I mean, most of the time when you're planning these fiber builds, you're planning 6 months to a year in advance because you have to know that far in advance when to be able to purchase your fiber. You know, we have fiber manufacturers and retailers in this country that when we place an order for fiber, it may take them 6 months to, you know, close to a year, depending on the demand for fiber. So we have to be very intentional about our fiber builds. And with those challenges come opportunities, and this is some of the stuff that you all were talking about earlier. There are several federal programs that are ongoing right now that hopefully will fill some of these gaps that you all have seen in your communities and hoping to address in the future. Our KTA members receive traditional, what's known as universal service support. That is you'll see it on a line. A lot of times my billing's paperless. I don't always pay attention to those billing lines, but if you look on your cell phone bill, you'll see what's known as Universal Service Fund, and there's a line on there that helps actually do traditional support in these high-cost areas to help deploy broadband in these areas. So a lot of our member companies receive that traditional USF support, which is administered by the FCC, which is very important that support remains. But you're also seeing the federal government and the FCC and this administration place a priority on rural broadband over the last couple of years, and the USD Reconnect program is one of those. They're actually operating through what's known as the Rural Utility Service, and they've put hundreds of millions of dollars in rural broadband for grant and loan funding opportunities for providers to provide areas in unserved areas. There was just this past January, I had 3 member companies that received Reconnect grants. Ballard Telephone Cooperative in Far West Kentucky received $2.4 million. They'll do a fiber to the premise build over 20 square miles that'll run fiber to 578 households and a critical community facility in that area of rural McCracken County. Duo Broadband, they will do a fiber to the premise network in rural Adair, Cumberland, and Russell counties. That's going to bring fiber to the premise to almost 3,700 households over about 45 square miles in those communities. And then just another one, Thacker Grigsby in rural Breathitt County, they were awarded $2.3 million to do a fiber to the premise build for 637 households spread over 109 square miles. So you can see that these funding opportunities are out there. We're not just relying on traditional USF service, that we're continuing to look for opportunities to apply for grants. And, I mentioned the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. Again, I know that, we'll have members in our association are looking at that. There may be additional funding opportunities there for them to bid to provide service in unserved areas. And then also broadband partnerships. This is something that as county officials, I'm sure that you all have talked about, and you may have talked about ad nauseum about broadband partnerships and what you can do to provide broadband in some of these unserved areas. NCTC, which is North Central Telephone Cooperative, based out of Lafayette, Tennessee, but they've offered incumbent service in Allen County. They recently partnered with Warren Rural Electric Cooperative. They announced this last October. They're doing a broadband pilot project area down there that could bring speeds up to a gig to about 800 residences in this broadband pilot area in rural Warren County. So that's an example of a cooperative, an electric cooperative and a telco cooperative partnering together. West Kentucky and Tennessee Telephone Cooperative, they've actually had partnerships with some of the county governments down there to bring broadband to some of those residences in their communities. I know Graves County announced a partnership with WKNT. I think Callaway County is looking to do something similar. I know that they're looking at something like that with a partnership with WKNT. So there are some broadband partnership opportunities. Obviously, it has to work out in terms of funding, and it makes sense for both the community and the cooperatives in those areas. But there are some broadband partnership opportunities that our folks are looking at today. And then also, I want to turn your attention to House Bill 362 that was passed this last session. I've said for the last few years, Kentucky, if you look at us in terms of our neighboring states. We're the hole in the donut, so to speak. We are one of the only of our surrounding states that do not offer any kind of tax exemptions or incentives or a broadband grant program to our incumbent providers in the state to provide broadband service. So this past year, working alongside several other telecom groups and cable groups, we advocated for the establishment of a state broadband grant funding program in Kentucky. That was House Bill 362. You can go back and take a look at that. But that is something that we were proud of. We got the framework put in place. There's a 50-50 match component for that. But unfortunately, because of COVID, and again, COVID has kind of limited what happened in a lot of fronts. When the state transitioned to a one-year state budget, we weren't able to get funding for that put in place. So I would advocate, and I will continue to advocate for the funding of that program. I know resources are going to be stretched because of COVID and looking into the next fiscal year. But there have been other states that have done this very well. Our neighbor to the south in Tennessee, since 2017, they have put about $45 million in a broadband grant program down there. They cap the usage. Each broadband grant is capped at $2 million, but there's a 50% match. And so any award, can be up to $3 million. But they've been able to connect, thousands of rural Tennesseans based on this program. So for $45 million. Now, obviously, there are hundreds of millions of dollars in needs. It would be the same in Kentucky. But if we're going to start somewhere, we can start making some inroads for these last mile connectivity issues by offering, some general appropriation funds for a state broadband grant program. So I do think that there's opportunities there for our cooperatives, our incumbent providers in Kentucky to continue to try to deploy more broadband in the Commonwealth. This is a picture right here I was talking about earlier. The one on the left was at the USDA Reconnect announcement. That's one of my board members there, Tom Preston, with the USDA Undersecretary, receiving his recognition for his $18.7 million award grant. Those build-outs will be over the next 5 years and for each of those award areas. And then the one on the right was the broadband pilot project that I was discussing in rural Warren County. That's actually the gentleman in the middle there. That's actually the first customer that was actually hooked up to fiber to the prim that they took a picture with. So again, that project will bring hopefully up to gigabit speeds for a broadband pilot area of about 800 residences in rural Warren County. So I just wanted to just kind of highlight a couple of those things. If you have any questions now, I'll be happy to try to answer them to the best of my ability.
They might be a little hungry. You can eat on camera, by the way. We don't mind. Eat a little.
I'm gonna take a drink on camera. I'm not Marco Rubio, but I'm gonna take a drink on camera.
Any other questions about how this connects to Kentucky Wired and everything we've heard so far in the last hour or two?
Mark Wells here in Christian County.
Hello.
How come we didn't use the template that TVA made when they electrified farms? They were able to do that in the 30s, surely.
Are you talking about the template for using broadband? I think you're seeing more consideration from other cooperatives, electric cooperatives, to do that. Kentucky isn't as restrictive as other states on that. A rural electric cooperative in Kentucky. Again, I don't represent that association, but I can say they can form a broadband affiliate now. I think there are some legislative. There's potentially some legislative components about how they use their assets, maybe to capitalize and access capital. Obviously, a broadband deployment project is pretty energy intensive, is actually pretty capital heavy and intensive. That is probably a consideration why a lot of people obviously haven't jumped into this. I think there have been other electric cooperatives who have wanted to explore partnerships with perhaps an adjacent or neighboring rural telephone cooperative. Because obviously, I think you're seeing some of these telephone cooperatives, because of smart grid technology and their future needs, they may have the ability to have fiber, but they haven't operated and wanted to operate a network. And so that obviously takes investment as well, and personnel, and having network operation managers who actually know how to manage a network. But there's different safety and cybersecurity concerns with managing a telecom network as well. And so I think that because of some personnel, but also some capital intensive reasons, you probably haven't seen it go like it has the way of the TVA. And obviously the TVA, they're guided by their regulations at the federal level, so it's a little bit different animal than what the rural electric cooperatives deal with in Kentucky.
USDA funding.
Mhm.
There's a lot of money there to expand broadband, and these folks on the call would be interested in accessing some of that, or partnering with you to access some of that money. What would be the best way to go about doing some of those things and reaching out for grants or additional funding to build out infrastructure?
Yeah, I would. I mean, it goes back to the partnership opportunity. If you have a local cooperative in that area, I would let them know. I mean, I'm sure if you have one in that area and they may not have, gigabit service, or you're an adjacent to one, continuing to let them know that you have a demand in that area, what it could look like, working with them early on. Because, as I said, it is a process to where if you're going to do a fiber build and advanced fiber deployment, it takes a lot of planning. The engineering aspects of it alone are pretty cumbersome. So, I mean, you're talking it could take a year or so out to put something like that together. And so I would say that if you're adjacent to one of those areas, reach out. I will be happy to connect you to those in those areas. If you do have a cooperative in that area, a telecom cooperative that you're interested in chatting with, and you may not have been able to make a connection, happy to do that. I will also say that each group in your area has a different association. The cable providers have one. Each of them have, and also the large cap price carriers. They do have representation in the state. So I would continue to reach out to them as local officials. Continue to stay in contact with them, because they're going to be able to link you in with the project, or those folks that are going to be doing these projects in the future. So I do think there are additional broadband partnership opportunities out there. Obviously, it has to work with you and your constituents and what you're able to do, and also those cooperatives that would be building the infrastructure and maintaining the network.
We do have a question from Bourbon County Clerk Richard Eads. How are you working with Kentucky Wired? You may have hit it a little bit, but if you could sort of go back to how you engage with that infrastructure.
Early on, we did have telcos that entered into partnerships to build out areas of the backbone. In eastern Kentucky, the East Kentucky Network, their East Kentucky Network is comprised of 5 different companies. Each of those companies built areas of the backbone throughout about 20 different counties in eastern Kentucky that make up East Kentucky Network. The same for the Bluegrass Network in western and south central Kentucky. About, I think, 20 or 21 counties there. Those companies built out some of the backbone for the state at a cost savings to the state. It was a synergy, as Mr. Link referred to earlier. We had some existing infrastructure in the area we were able to tap onto, build a backbone that may have connected to existing infrastructure that we already had, and save the state a few $1 million in the process in terms of construction. So that was how we partnered early on. Since then, like I said, the partnerships there were on the construction side. I don't really know any conversations that have taken place in terms of if the wholesale providers have reached out, and I've not really had an opportunity to know some of those conversations that may have taken place with some of our members and on the wholesale side. So it's been limited in that regard. And like I said, our members had a pretty robust middle mile network. Our focus has been on last mile, providing the last mile to constituents. So a lot of our efforts have been focused on either securing grants and loans, looking for broadband partnerships, but our focus has really been on that last mile piece.
Asking you to look into your crystal ball about what's going on in Frankfurt. How are all these interests being, be it public or private, and the required investment and resulting reward being viewed in Frankfurt, in your opinion?
I think, to echo the comments that Mr. Link had earlier, if there was one silver lining that would come out of COVID-19, has been the highlight that of continued need for broadband deployment in the state. Obviously, demand far exceeds available revenue. However, the areas that do lack access, there's an access issue in some areas. There's also probably an affordability component of this in other areas. And so I think that the leadership in both the House and the Senate, and I think those individuals that work in the governor's administration are having those conversations. Let's just say I think they're well aware of those pieces, both the infrastructure side and the affordability side. So I think as you enter into 2021, I've, like everybody else, I haven't been able to interact with a lot of people. I've sat in on webinars, and I've heard legislative leaders say that these are things that are under consideration for future budgets. Obviously, every dollar is going to be precious. I know as county officials, you all watch that road fund closely, and you know how precious road fund dollars are. I know that it's going to be the same in other areas of the budget as well. And so I do hope, as more folks have had to transition to telecommuting and virtual learning, that House Bill 362 and that state broadband grant program, if we could get something like that up and running, again, that's probably an intermediate fix. It may not be an immediate fix. I think you're still going to see the administration look at some short-term goals about increasing additional Wi-Fi hotspots, some things that they can do for students and telecommuters in a given area on increasing additional Wi-Fi hotspots. I think something intermediate that we can look at is funding that type of program with House Bill 362, and then the long goal would be establishing those regulations and the guidelines of the program so that we could maximize the use of those dollars in the future. Because as I said, you're not going to be able to flip a switch. If you could do a round of funding, you're going to have to give folks a year or two out in order to be able to complete some of these fiber builds. So I do think that an intermediate goal would be to try to get the funding, and the long-term goal, as we set the guidelines up, we want to be able to maximize those dollars to the best of our ability.
Okay, and one more question. Actually, this is from Shelley. She wanted to know if you could give any sort of timeline on the post-RDOF auction steps.
Well, I know in October, so they're going to do 2 rounds. And to answer your question up front, because a lot of times we speak and then we get to the question later, to answer your question up front, we don't know when round 2 is going to start. So there's a $16 billion round first that will go in October. That'll go, and I think once that funding has wound down, then they'll set the timelines for round 2. The first round, that $16 billion, like I said, there's about 99,000 census blocks that are unserved. Obviously, not all of those are going to be served, even through the auction. However, there will be an opportunity for providers to bid in those areas. As was alluded to earlier, the maps aren't as consistent as they would need to be. So even certain areas that they may say they have 25.3, they may really not. But that 25.3 threshold is what they're using to define as an unserved area. So there will be a first round. It'll begin in October as the bidding takes place. I'm not exactly sure the time on how long that'll run. It's basically, I think, until the funding will wind down. And then they'll do a second round. I think, of about $4 billion. And that second round, and the good news is, I will say the FCC has tried to place a priority on you will be scored higher in what you're awarded through the auction if you're going to deploy fiber versus some other technology. The good thing about fiber, they're a lot of times they're referred to as future-proof networks because, as Mr. Link said earlier, fiber is going to be here for a long time. It's the easiest way in terms of being able to go through a lot of data. I mean, it's like a hair strand fiber. I mean, it really is. It's like if you plucked your hair, it's about that length and width a lot of times, and they shoot light through it. But the ability of it to carry data a long distance, it's amazing what they can do in terms of technology. And so it's really called a future-proof network because the ability to carry data longer distances, there's not latency issues. I think somebody asked earlier about Starlink. Those are low satellite orbit that will provide internet service, and they're targeting it for rural areas. The one issue that you will have with satellite operators typically is a latency issue. So a lot of times, if you're trying to upload and things like that, a latency issue can be an issue for uploading a lot of information. And so it will fill in the gaps in some areas, but if you're talking about things like, agritech and I was going to say, I think the terminology is agritech now, but smart farming, agritech, however you want to look at it, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the answer. I know because we're looking at in the future to autonomous farming equipment and, being able to do that hopefully with 5G technology, but all of that is going to need fiber backbone. There is so much data that's transmitted over the network, and so...
I got about 30 minutes.
I'm done. That was where I was at. Is there another question?
No,
Okay.
I think somebody just accidentally.
Oh, okay. But yeah, that I
You don't mute yourself.
no, you're fine. But I do think some of those other technologies aren't as future proof as what you will see with fiber. So the one good thing I think the FCC is doing is trying to prioritize those networks that they think are going to be here for a long period of time that will be able to meet the data demands of consumers and your constituents in the future.
Great. We do have a question in the chat from Magistrate Sims. How do you recommend vesting ISP providers or possible partners for county government?
Could you repeat that one more time? I'm sorry.
How do you recommend vesting ISP providers or possible partners for county government? How do you engage? What would be the best way?
I would say if you have a cooperative in your area and you haven't been in contact, I would happily try to engage or be a conduit to engage some of those folks for you. Reach out to me, and if we have a provider in that area or adjacent to that area, I would be happy to try to connect you. It really is just, I think, relationship building between the local officials and whether you have an electric cooperative or a rural telephone cooperative in and around your area or adjacent to your area, just continuing to build those relationships, because I really think that's how these broadband projects, these pilot projects have happened in some of these areas. It was literally people sitting around in a room at a policy roundtable and saying, well, we have issues in this area, is there something we can do about it? And I know that's a very simple answer, but I mean, it really is just a relationship opportunity between those folks that reside in your community and maybe adjacent to your community.
Hey, anybody have any questions? Raise your hand, unmute yourself. Anybody have any questions for Jamie? He's still in the room as well, or about any of these topics on broadband?
I've got a question here, and I think he probably already answered it, but I asked it again. Putting in, you're saying that you don't think in the future satellite to the home service is going to replace all the infrastructure that we're going to have to pay for to build these counties out. Is that what you're saying?
I think.
Get the leg knocked out from under us here, 10 years from now.
Yeah. I think where the industry's going in the 21st century digital economy in terms of what I call, like I said, I've heard it called smart tech, agritech. But if you're looking to bring fiber to the farm and running autonomous equipment where literally a farmer can sit in his home on an iPad and water his fields by quadrant through an iPad, there will be latency issues associated with technology that's not linked to fiber. So I think 5G technology, which is a wireless technology that has the capability to have advanced speeds, is going to be a focus of. I think it's really going to be the focus of providers heading into the future because of the speeds that they have, and it is a wireless technology. However, all of that traffic, and this is what I keep going back to, even though it's a wireless technology, all of that traffic has to have fiber connectivity to backhaul all that traffic. So if something goes down, that traffic can still travel. And so, like I said, I still think fiber, it's not the cheapest, obviously, in rural areas to deploy, and so there are challenges associated with it, no doubt. But in terms of technology and where it's going, I do think fiber is a future-proof network because I think the demands are only going to continue to increase with in rural areas, not only for entertainment but for your economy and what your farmers, businessmen are going to expect in the future to be able to do.
I've heard complaints about used satellite. Some people around here in our county have that. It hasn't been satisfactory is what my impression is, but I also saw Elon Musk, fly a satellite the other day too.
Yeah.
Launch a ship, so all that stuff.
Well, I do think that, again, I'm not a satellite provider and I don't represent them. I can't sit here and say that satellite technology won't fill in the gaps in some of these rural areas if there's nothing. But because of issues like topography, if you're in an area or have terrain that's somewhat mountainous, you have a lot of trees or something like that. It's really easy to interfere with those signals with satellite technology, and so latency will always be an issue when it comes to satellite technology. So if you have to upload, if you're working from home and have to do video or upload information, satellite's going to frustrate you.
Go ahead there, Judge. You have a question? Yes.
Fiber optic can be run through water lines, existing water lines.
I actually just had a conversation about this yesterday. I'll be forthright with you. I had not heard about this technique for deploying fiber. I just heard about some of this literally yesterday, and I say literally as in literally. I know that there are some folks that are considering running, I guess, alongside water lines or actually in water lines, calling it wet fiber. I'll be interested, and if you have questions about this, I'll happily ask some of our network operators and engineers. This is not something that I know my folks have done to date. Not saying that they won't, but I was not familiar with this. But I heard about it as of yesterday, and I think it's a technology that I know that I think's been deployed internationally. They've done this in certain areas, and so this is something that I think they're looking to do here. Yeah, Jamie's going to answer that as a part of that.
Judge, I just wanted to add that I was on a call with the National Governors Association a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that states are looking at now is called a Dig Once program, so that when highway projects are taking place and they're dealing with other utilities, to go on and lay in conduits during those projects that may be empty for a while, but we know that in the future fiber or some other type of cabling may be needed. So go on while the ground's open, go on and lay in conduits, and then when that need arises in the future, you've got that channel there to pull fiber through. So.
And I will say, in some areas, it's historically it's been kind of hard to locate water lines in certain areas, and that's something that as an industry where we're trying to bury fiber, that's always a challenge because locating water lines in a lot of those areas can be very difficult at times.
Hey Tyler, it's Colleen Cheney in Madison County.
Hey, Colleen.
I was the person you talked to early yesterday about this.
Yeah.
Just to let everybody know, we have a meeting with the Division of Water on Tuesday about the concept of wet fiber. So I'm happy to report back to Keiko about that meeting at the conclusion of that. They are very interested in the concept, and we've identified a company that's sole source that does that. So as we learn more, I'll let everyone know. Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. We'd be very interested in hearing about that. think
Thank
that
you all.
does it for you, Tyler. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate it. And good luck to each of you and your employees and everybody staying safe. I know it's probably very difficult right now managing a staff and your employees and just the things that are going on in your community. So you all will be in my thoughts and prayers as you deal with a lot of these issues.